In 1964, Clint Eastwood was 34 years old and trapped in what looked like the final chapter of a mediocre career. He had spent 5 years playing Rowdy Yates on a TV western called Rawhide, second lead to Eric Fleming, saying his lines and cashing his paychecks and watching his dreams of movie stardom fade with each passing season. The show was losing viewers. Everyone knew it was getting canceled. And Clint's agent kept telling him to be patient, that something would come along, that his time would come. But Clint knew better. He had seen how Hollywood worked, how it chewed up actors and spit them out, how being the second lead on a dying TV show was not a stepping stone to anything except unemployment. And then a telegram arrived from Italy, from a director named Sergio Leone, who was making a low-budget western in Spain and wanted Clint to star in it for $15,000. Everyone Clint talked to said it was a terrible idea, that going to Europe to make a cheap imitation of an American western would destroy what little career he had left. That real stars didn't work for Italian directors nobody had heard of. But Clint Eastwood read that telegram and saw something nobody else saw, a door opening, a chance to become something other than Rowdy Yates. An opportunity to either fail spectacularly or create something that might actually matter. And what happened in Spain over the next few months would transform Clint from a forgettable TV cowboy into the most iconic Western hero in cinema history. Would create a character so powerful that 60 years later people still instantly recognize the Poncho and the Cigar and the Squint. Would prove that sometimes the riskiest choice is the only choice worth making. Before we reveal how Clint Eastwood became the man with no name, if you appreciate these deep dives into the moments that changed Hollywood forever, please subscribe and turn on notifications. These are the stories of how legends are born, and your support helps us keep telling them. Now let's go back to 1964 and understand why Clint Eastwood was desperate, enough to gamble everything on an unknown Italian. Director Rawhide had been Clint's big break when it started in 1959. 7 years of steady work playing the young trailhand, learning the cattle business from Eric Fleming's trail boss. But by 1964, Clint was too old to play the eager kid anymore, and the show's ratings were dropping as audiences lost interest in traditional westerns. CBS was planning to cancel after the current season. And Clint knew that, once the show ended, Hollywood would see him as damaged goods, a TV actor who couldn't transition to films. Just another face that had peaked early and faded fast. He had tried to get movie roles during Rawhide's hiatus periods, but the results were humiliating. Studios saw him as too tall, too stiff, too slow. Universal had already fired him once in the 1950s for those exact reasons. Major directors didn't return his calls. Clint was facing the prospect of being 35 years old, with no job and no prospects. Another cautionary tale about the TV curse. Then Sergio Leone's telegram arrived, and everything Clint had been taught about Hollywood said to ignore it. Leone was an Italian director who had made sword and sandal epics, the kind of cheap genre films that serious actors avoided. The western he wanted to make was called A Fistful of Dollars, a remake of a Japanese samurai film transposed to the American West, which sounded bizarre and unmarketable. The budget was microscopic by Hollywood standards. The shooting location was the Spanish desert because it was cheaper than filming in America or Italy, and Leone spoke almost no English while Clint spoke no Italian. The script featured a protagonist with no name who said maybe 200 words in the entire film, which violated every rule about how to build a sympathetic character. The fee was $15,000 less than Clint made for a single season of Rawhide. Every agent, every friend, every person Clint consulted told him the same thing. This was career suicide. But Clint saw something in Leone's vision that intrigued him. A different approach to westerns that rejected the clean-cut heroes Hollywood had been producing for decades. Leone wanted a mysterious gunfighter who appeared from nowhere, manipulated to warring families for his own profit, and disappeared back into nowhere. A character defined by what he didn't say rather than what he did say. That resonated with Clint, who had spent 5 years on Rawhide, watching how little dialogue actually mattered on screen, how the camera could tell stories through faces and silences. That dialogue only cluttered, and there was something else, something practical. If Clint stayed in Hollywood waiting for the perfect opportunity, he would be waiting unemployed, watching younger actors take the roles he wanted. At least in Spain, he would be working, learning, creating something. even if that something turned out to be a disaster nobody ever saw. In May 1964, Clint flew to Madrid and then drove south to Almería, a desert region in southern Spain that looked convincingly like the American Southwest. The production was chaos, a mixture of Italian and Spanish crew members who barely communicated. Sets that looked cheap even by B-movie standards, and Sergio Leone directing through a translator because he and Clint shared no common language. Leone was a large, passionate man who directed with grand gestures and detailed instructions that got lost in translation, leading to constant confusion about what he actually wanted. But despite the chaos, Clint quickly realized that Leone was a visual genius, someone who understood composition and framing and movement in ways that American directors didn't. Leone would spend hours setting up a single shot, getting the shadows exactly right, positioning actors in geometric precision, creating images that looked like paintings. And Leone had a theory about the American Western that was radical. Less is more. Leone believed Hollywood Westerns had become boring because everyone talked too much, explained too much, told audiences what to think instead of letting them feel. His vision for A Fistful of Dollars was a Western that communicated through looks and silence and violence, where the protagonist barely spoke because his actions defined him completely. Clint loved this approach because it matched everything he had learned swimming in the Pacific Ocean 13 years earlier. That silence has power, that stillness creates tension, that the most interesting performances come from economy rather than excess. When Leone showed Clint the wardrobe for the character, a ratty poncho, beaten-up hat, and stubby cigar, Clint understood immediately. This wasn't a clean hero. This was a man who had been through hell and survived by being harder and colder than everyone else. The costume told the story better than any dialogue could. The filming process was unlike anything Clint had experienced in Hollywood. Leone would shoot a scene from multiple angles, capturing tiny details, extreme close-ups of eyes and hands, wide shots that showed the landscape dwarfing the characters. He had a particular obsession with faces, would spend 20 minutes adjusting lighting to get a shadow falling across an actor's cheek, exactly right. Understood that cinema was about images first and story second. He collaborated closely with composer Ennio Morricone, who was creating a revolutionary score that mixed trumpets and whistles and electric guitars in ways that sounded nothing like traditional Western music. Morricone's main theme, with its lonely trumpet and cracking whip sounds, became as iconic as the visual imagery. Leone would play Morricone's music on set during filming, telling Clint to move to the rhythm, to let the music inform his performance. This was radical. Most directors added music in post-production. But Leone treated music and image as inseparable, choreographing action to match the rhythms Morricone had composed. The result was something strange and hypnotic. A Western that felt more like opera than the straightforward action films Hollywood produced. Clint developed the character's signature squint partly by accident. The Spanish sun was blindingly bright, and Clint found himself naturally squinting against the glare. Leone loved it, told Clint to exaggerate it, to make the squint a character trait rather than just sun protection. The cigar was Leone's idea, but Clint made it his own, discovering that holding a cigar gave him something to do with his mouth that prevented unnecessary talking, that the smoke created visual atmosphere, that biting down on it conveyed aggression without words. The poncho became armor, something the character could hide behind, creating mystery about his body language. Every element worked together to create a protagonist who was more archetype than person, more symbol than character. Someone audiences could project themselves onto because he revealed so little about who he actually was. When filming wrapped in June 1964, Clint returned to California with no idea whether A Fistful of Dollars would ever be seen by American audiences. The film was released in Italy in 1964 and became a surprise hit, earning massive box office and creating a sensation. Italian audiences had never seen a Western like this, so cynical and violent and visually stunning, but legal problems with Akira Kurosawa's Yojimba, the Japanese film it was based on, prevented American distribution for years. Meanwhile, Leone wanted to make a sequel, offering Clint $50,000 for a few dollars more, 4 times what he had paid for the first film. Clint went back to Spain in 1965, and Leone refined the character further, giving him a partner played by Lee Van Cleef creating moral ambiguity by making both men equally ruthless bounty hunters. The film expanded Leone's visual style, longer close-ups, more elaborate set pieces, Morricone's score even more experimental, with pocket watches ticking and musical boxes chiming. For the good, the bad, and the ugly in 1966, Leone created his masterpiece, a 3-hour epic set during the Civil War, with Clint's character now explicitly named Blondie. Leone paid Clint $250,000, a fee that reflected how valuable the man with no name had become internationally, even though America still hadn't seen the films. The final film's cemetery shootout, with its extreme close-ups of eyes cutting to vast, wide shots of 3 men in an enormous graveyard, became one of cinema's most imitated sequences, a perfect synthesis of Leone's operatic vision and Clint's minimalist performance. What Clint understood during those 3 years in Spain was something that would define his entire career. Authenticity comes from restraint, not excess. Hollywood westerns had become parodies of themselves, with heroes who were too clean, too noble, too articulate. They told audiences exactly how to feel about everything, leaving no room for mystery or ambiguity. Leone's westerns did the opposite. They showed violence as brutal and unglamorous, heroes as morally compromised, and motivations as selfish rather than selfless. The man with no name didn't fight for justice or honor. He fought for money and survival, which made him more believable than every white-hat cowboy Hollywood had ever produced. And by saying almost nothing, by communicating through looks and actions, the character became universal, transcending language and culture in ways that dialogue-heavy characters never could. When the Dollars trilogy finally reached American theaters in 1967, the impact was immediate and massive. American audiences, particularly younger viewers, tired of old-fashioned westerns, embraced the film's cynicism and style. Critics initially dismissed them as violent exploitation, but the public didn't care. They had discovered something new and exciting, a Western hero who felt dangerous and real. Clint Eastwood returned to Hollywood no longer a failed TV actor, but an international star with the kind of leverage that lets you dictate terms. He could have played safe, made traditional Hollywood westerns, cashed in on his new fame with conventional choices. Instead, he continued taking risks, making Hang 'Em High and Coogan's Bluff, and eventually Dirty Harry, each role building on the minimalist style he had developed with Leone, the character of the man with no name wasn't just a role Clint played, it was a philosophy of acting that would define everything he did for the next 60 years. The squint, the silence, the economic gestures, the refusal to over-explain or over-perform, all of it became Clint's signature style. When he started directing in the 1970s, he brought that same minimalist approach to filmmaking, shooting quickly, trusting actors, avoiding unnecessary coverage, understanding that powerful images don't need elaborate dialogue to work. Unforgiven, $1 Million Baby, Gran Torino. All of these films carry the DNA of what Clint learned from Leone in the Spanish desert. That silence can be more powerful than speeches. That mystery engages audiences more than explanation. That restraint creates space for viewers to participate in the story, rather than just passively receive it. The irony is that everyone who told Clint not to go to Spain in 1964 was logically correct. Making a cheap Italian Western when Rawhide was ending should have been career suicide. Leone was unknown. The budget was tiny. The concept was bizarre. The risk was enormous. But Clint understood something they didn't. Sometimes, the safest choice is the most dangerous one. Staying in Hollywood, waiting for conventional opportunities. Playing by established rules, that was the real career killer. Going to Spain was a gamble, but it was a gamble on himself, on his instincts, on the possibility that there might be a different way to succeed than following the path everyone else followed. And that gamble paid off in ways nobody could have predicted, transforming Clint from a disposable TV actor into a cinema icon who would still be working and winning awards 60 years later. Today, the man with no name remains one of the most recognizable characters in film history, instantly identifiable even to people who have never seen the movies. The Poncho, the Cigar, the Squint, these have become cultural symbols that transcend their original context. Filmmakers from every generation cite Leone's Dollars trilogy as influence, recognize how it changed westerns and changed action cinema, and changed what was possible with minimalist performance. And at the center of all of it is Clint Eastwood, the actor who was brave enough or desperate enough or smart enough to bet everything on an Italian director's strange vision, who found freedom in silence and power in restraint, who proved that sometimes becoming an icon requires first becoming someone nobody recognizes.